Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and today we're going to talk about the LCS. In this video, I'm going to talk about every team and every player that we think is on that in that starting roster. And the reason I want to make this video is because my opinions don't change as much as other people's in general. And I have an okay feel, I think, for the talent level of the players, and I use this kind of information for betting. If you haven't seen any of my previous videos, I had a really successful Worlds. It could have been much better if I didn't do some like stupid parlays and stuff like that for my bank account. But in general, from like picking the games, I had a very good record, and I know a lot of people reached out and said that they were very thankful that I was giving all the world's content. So basically, that's the first thing that you should pay attention to in this video, is that a lot of the information is from a betting perspective, meaning that I prefer betting on underdogs just in general because it's better. You get better value for your money normally. So I have a couple disclaimers, and I'll explain the ranking system that I'm using. So first of all, here's the disclaimer. Yes, all of these players are better than me at League of Legends. My goal is to provide information that will help people make smart decisions in regards to betting specifically, and that we will make money. This means that almost all of the language that I use is meant to be taken relatively, meaning professional player to professional player, not like I say this person's bad, meaning they're bad and they should be like a bronze player. It's just one player relative to another, and still we might have disagreements on talent level and stuff like that, but at least like we have a starting point, and that's my starting point. And then lastly, this means, and like there will be points where I do think that a League of Legends player is a bad player or a bad person or should be flamed or should be removed from a team, but that's not really what I that's really not what I'm like trying to cause to happen. I'm really just doing this for betting reasons, so just keep that in mind. And then for the lettered tier system, I'm trying to give every player a talent grade, and I think that's important because it some of my rankings you're going to disagree with, but I think that if a player is in the same tier, generally they can compete with them pretty easily. If they are in different tiers, it means that the team with the better players should have an advantage in draft, and if it's not drafted around, it'll turn into a real advantage. Like obviously, there's always a situation where a player from 2 or 3 tiers lower can have a really good game, or the team can have a really good draft and cause that player to carry. But going into the matchup, when we're trying to think about the teams compared to one another, there's no reason to give the lesser player like better odds to win the match. So that's just I guess important distinction. So this might change a little bit, my ranking system, as I go like through different regions and start comparing players internationally, which I might do. One thing I want to do is create like a player matrix in the LCS for like not really a rank. I guess it is kind of a ranking, saying like the most important players for like the drafts and for winning games, but I haven't done that yet, and I wanted to get this video out before I did something like that. So in the S tier, we have players who are good enough to warp drafts and can impact league-wide metas. I think I want to change this to like players who are good on an international level, like a very good international player, because in reality, we see some of these top players from China and Korea really impacting the entire world in terms of meta. So that should probably be S, and I don't have anybody in the player rankings as an S player right now, but that might change, because I do think that there's the potential for those players to exist in North America. I just don't think they necessarily exist right now. But it's borderline. Like I think that Han Sama's a very good player. I think that Danny's a very good player. Just two examples of players that I like. I'm borderline with where I'd want to rank them internationally. Not saying that they're the best AD carries in the world, but I think they can be competitive with some of those players. A tier is top of the league, maybe meta dependent, has well documented history and performances, a known quantity. The B tier can compete with A-level players, but is more prone to large mistakes, may have S or A tier talent, but not confident they will reach it. And that, I know that gets a little messy, and people will disagree with some of the players I have listed in A tier for that reason, but that's fine. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. C is a league average player, meta and draft dependent, will not reach S or A tier. Now, I'm saying they won't reach S or A tier in terms of talent, but there's a difference between talent and form. And people who follow international soccer/football will know the saying, form is temporary, but class is permanent. That basically means there are players who will have the season of their lives, but the chances of them repeating that over and over again and becoming some kind of generational player is non-existent. So that's the difference between a player like Ronaldo or Messi compared to someone like Declan Rice. Now, Declan Rice is a good player. He's playing really well right now, but most of you who are watching this probably don't know who he is. That's just a way to think about it. D is a below average player, but doesn't completely handicap their team. And then F is a bad player who hurts their team in general and should be replaced. And if I'm being honest, I do think that some of the players in this list are D and F players, but I haven't really ranked as many of them as Ds and Fs that I probably should have. But let's go through each position, and then we'll go through the teams and rank the teams once I've talked through this, because it will kind of impact how I see things. And I haven't really done that yet. I have an idea of where I think teams are going to rank, but I didn't do 1 through 10 yet. Okay. So let's start at the bottom, because this is part of the reason why I wanted to make this video. So Revenge from Immortals is an okay top laner, but I was watching somebody's video the other day, and they were talking about how Immortals was building around Revenge, and they thought that it wasn't necessarily a bad idea because Revenge is like an up-and-coming player, and if you have known quantities around them, then they should be able to compete. Actually, let's do this. They should be able to compete either now or at some point in the future. I think that's completely false. I don't think that Revenge is a good player relative to other top laners, and I don't think that Revenge has some kind of timeline or window that is much better than a lot of the other players in the LCS. So what does that mean? Basically what I'm saying is Revenge isn't young enough to be that kind of player. Now, some people want to give players the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, maybe in a couple of years from now they'll be really good. And this is an opinion, but you do not see that in general, especially in a game like League of Legends. How many world-class players have been able to win a world championship or something like that when they didn't show any sign of being talented for several years? That it just doesn't really happen. I can't think of any really good examples. It's like there are players out there like Sword Art who they were always very competitive internationally, were pretty dominant domestically, and then they went to the LPL, was on Suning, and Suning made that run to the semifinals. Like, those are the kinds of players where even though they weren't a perennial world championship contender, you always knew that Sword Art was a good player because they were continuously showing up to international tournaments, continuously playing well, and it was always very impactful. So for something like a top laner in the LCS, if we're looking at it just from an age perspective, Bwipo is the same age as Revenge, and Summit, probably the biggest signing this summer in the LCS, is only 1 year older than Revenge. So if you're taking the angle of, I think that we should build around Revenge because a few years from now Revenge might be the best top laner in the LCS, unless Summit and Bwipo leave the LCS, Revenge will most likely never be the best top laner in the LCS. Now you have another player like Huni. Huni's been around forever. Huni has competed internationally, has played on some of the best teams in the world. Huni's 1 year older than Revenge. So the window for Revenge being like some incredible player, in my mind, just doesn't really exist. Like I haven't seen almost anything from Revenge that would suggest that they are a difference maker in the top lane. Like, can they win a game? Yes. Can they win a split for their team? Most likely no. First of all, because it's not the most impactful position, and second of all, because I don't think that they're talented enough to accomplish something like that. Let's go to Kumo. So Kumo is another player that I think is probably just better than Revenge. On FlyQuest, we've seen Kumo compete like on Evil Geniuses when they were going back and forth between Kumo and Impact for import slot reasons. But Kumo, I think, is probably just a better player than Revenge. We've seen Kumo play some like very hard carry champions. I think there were like some Fiora games and Camille games where Kumo went completely off. But with that being said, I don't think that Kumo is, good enough to go into every matchup against somebody like Licorice, Huni, Bwipo, Impact, Summit, or Someday, and just I'm not going to think to myself, oh wow, FlyQuest really has a big advantage in top lane. Now, it's possible that happens, in a week, in 1 or 2 weeks of the LCS. Like maybe there's a really good champion that Kumo is, an expert on, and causes big draft problems and forces the enemy team into making some really tough decisions in draft and ends up like winning FlyQuest a game. That's possible, but that's not going to happen most of the time. So again, just really not a difference maker in my mind. Fake God was pretty good on Dignitas at different points. I think that they're just not a difference maker again. It might sound like ageist or something, but if you're a 21 or 22 year old professional player in League of Legends and you're not already thought of as one of the top players in your role, you're most likely not going to get to that point. It doesn't mean that you can't be like a good player for a professional team where you like can help them by being a weak side top laner or something like that. That's very possible, but you're just not going to be the guy. And it's tough to kind of say the same thing over and over again, but that's just the case for a player like Fake God as well. I think that they are pretty good at like Gangplank. I think that's one of their main champions that was very impactful for the last year or so. But that is like their team has to put big restrictions on their own draft in order to allow Fake God to play something like Gangplank. Next up, we have Jenkins. Now, I like Jenkins a lot. I coached Rutgers for like a year in like an unofficial capacity, and Jenkins was actually a freshman there while I was coaching. So I've talked to Jenkins. I've texted back and forth with Jenkins in the past, and he's like a really good kid. With that being said, I don't think that Jenkins is as good as Licorice, Huni, Bwipo, Impact, Summit, or Someday. And that's not me putting down Jenkins. That's me saying that they're not as good as some of these other players who could probably play in multiple regions in the world. With that being said, I think that Jenkins was kind of unlucky to not already be in this position, because Jenkins is one of the best Kennen players in North America. I'm pretty sure that's just a factual statement. He had like multiple challenger level accounts where he only played Kennen, and like just think about any meta where Nuguri is like a very good top laner and can force the enemy team to ban out Kennen. There are a lot of Korean top laners like that, where like you basically can't allow Kennen in the game because he's just going to have gigantic impact in the late game team fights. And Jenkins could have been that style of player and still can be that style of player. So if Kennen is a very important champion in one of these metas, that might be a time where Jenkins can really kind of show the top level of their range of outcomes. Let's just keep moving. Licorice. So Licorice, obviously has had a tough year or so, just being on a lesser team. But the talent is still there. When Licorice was like continuously winning on cloud nine, people would say that Licorice was extremely good. I would always kind of take it with a grain of salt, knowing that the rest of the team was very strong, and it makes it a lot easier to play League of Legends when like your entire team is just better than the opponent. But Licorice is kind of unlucky to not transition from C9 to another top team. I like Licorice a lot. If I was starting a team today for this year, I would take Licorice before Jenkins, Fake God, Kumo, and Revenge if I wanted to win this year. Like, theoretically, Licorice could be on the back end of his career. Maybe he's lost it. I don't really think so. Like, a 24-year-old top laner might not be able to compete on an international level unless they've already shown that like immense talent. But Licorice is kind of borderline. I think that like if Golden Guardians, who will not make it to Worlds, if they did make it to Worlds, Licorice isn't going to look like a fool, is basically what I'm getting at there. So now we're in the A tier, and the A tier, like I said before, these are players who are at the top of the league, maybe meta dependent, has well-documented history or performances, and is a known quantity. Now, some of you might be saying, well, Pykel, Huni is a wild card. You never know which Huni you're going to get. But in my mind, Huni is still an elite player. He's a world-class player. Now, he is much more risk-tolerant and embraces variance. But we see a lot of elite top laners kind of play that sort of style. And that's why I think of players like Huni and the Shy more highly than a lot of other people do, because I don't mind like that one game or a couple of games or a week or two or maybe a month of them not playing that well, because I know that at their peak they're going to be a difference maker for their team. Now, Huni is someone who I am a little concerned isn't playing as well right now, because there were some points last season where Rumble was actually being played, and Huni should have been more impactful in that type of meta, or well, not that type of meta, when that champion is played in the game, because he was always a very good Rumble player, and there were moments last year where his Rumble ultimates were just complete garbage, and that made me pretty sad. But Huni can beat anyone and lose to anyone. He has insane variance, a wide range of outcomes. I love Huni. I'm a big Huni fan. Next up is Bwipo. So Bwipo is another very good player. I love Bwipo. I think that they're a very smart player, and that kind of shown through when they transitioned into jungle almost seamlessly. And outside of Upset getting outside of Upset not really playing at Worlds because of family matters, Fnatic had a chance to be an okay team at Worlds. They were never going to win Worlds in my opinion, but even with Bwipo in the first year as a jungler, they were still very competitive. And I just like everything about Bwipo, really. He's very champion diverse. He communicates well, like on the analyst desk and stuff like that, which obviously you're not going to give somebody points as a player for that, but it makes me have more confidence that he's able to help a team understand the game and is like having another coach, and that's a big positive. I think that Bwipo has proven that they can compete on an international level. When they were a rookie, I think that was the year that IG won Worlds, and it was Fnatic against IG, so he has that history. He's been one of the best top laners in the West for the past couple of years, so I think that it's pretty easy to see that Bwipo is definitely in the A tier, and this is where I kind of start thinking maybe there should be an S tier. And if there was an S tier for just North America, I think that I'd probably have Bwipo in the S tier. But for now, I'm just going to leave it all as A tiers. Next up is Impact. So Impact obviously has been one of the best top laners in the world in the past. He has been one of the best top laners in the world in the past. It was a little different when they were at their peak. in terms of strength. There was a lot of weak side tank playing, and it was a little bit more difficult to see the skill expression because a lot of the champions he was playing didn't really allow for that. But he is the consummate professional. Generally doesn't cause big problems for their own team that they have to the rest of the team has to come clean up the mess. But Impact doesn't really take over many games. And for that reason, I don't really look at it as a bad matchup for most people. Like Huni against Impact, Huni's more likely to be the aggressor, and maybe Huni falls flat on his face and allows Impact to not carry the game, but have a big influence in the game because of being the more patient side of the matchup. But I mean, Whippo against Impact, Summit against Impact, Someday against Impact, doesn't really sway it too far one way or the other. Really good player, obviously in the A tier for North America. I would not put Impact in the S tier internationally, and I probably wouldn't put them in the S tier in North America either, because I don't think that he gives you that higher range of outcomes where you have these extremely high carry performances. Next up, we have Summit. Summit is an extremely good player. Summit has always been thought of as a very talented player. Summit is somebody who, LS would talk about endlessly. Even Monte Cristo and Doa, when they were still the casters, I'm pretty sure that's when Summit started coming onto the scene as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, was thought of as the next great top laner. And it never really happened because their team was just bad. And it's unfortunate that Summit didn't make this kind of move earlier. I think they were holding out hope that they could be on a team that's competing for world championships in Korea because they have that level of talent. But now, coming to North America, they immediately become one of the better top laners. Now, we've seen it in the past where somebody will come over from Korea and kind of not really do that well. Think of Someday. Someday was on Dignitas, and Dignitas was horrible. And now Someday is with a group of good players and has looked better. Didn't look as good as I thought they would last year, but Someday is still a very good player. And Summit and Someday a few years ago were both thought of as elite top laners in Korea, just not necessarily on good teams. So now, moving into this split, I think that we kind of just have to assume that Summit is going to be that level of that talent level that we all know is there. It's just, is C9 going to give enough resources to somebody like Summit? And I think that it's funny because now that LS is the coach of C9, it's gonna be much more common for Summit to have the scaling advantage in top lane, and that's going to allow him to look even more powerful in games that they're able to draft that way. That's one of the benefits of LS's style. It may or may not help the team long term, but it will help a player like Summit get big advantages in top lane, just like these complete stomps from a draft, because of draft. And then last but not least, so I put Summit as A, obviously, and I would put Summit in the S tier, definitely. So it would probably be Summit and Whippo so far. Last but not least is Someday. When Someday came over, I was extremely excited. I thought that Someday was going to take over the LCS. Someday's team was garbage. Dignitas was just never very good. They may have been competitive for different stretches, but they were never a serious... They were never a serious threat to become a dynasty and allow Someday to continuously shine. The reason that happens is because throughout League of Legends, there have been metas that kind of required top laners to play tanks because of the insane gold value allowed by some of the tank items, which just shut down different kinds of carries. So that was more of a draft consequence of his upside being limited, because there were years where you couldn't really play a carry top laner because you were probably going to get outscaled unless you got fed, and you weren't really going to get fed in a professional game because they were just going to turtle. So like I said, potential S players would be Summit and Whippo. So I'll do that. I'll change. Actually, I'm not going to. How would that happen? So it would be that. S. I could see that. So we'll make it like that now. And that might change in the future, but I do think there is a difference between Summit and Bwipo and the rest of the top laners in the LCS. But that's enough for top. Let's go to jungle. So jungle start off with Pride Stalker. I don't like the acquisition of Pride Stalker. I just don't think that they're a good player. Pride Stalker is someone who I saw in like EU Masters, I think, and I just really wasn't impressed. I've never left the game thinking to myself, wow, Pride Stalker is like next level. He's going to be a great player. And again, he's 22, and I'm going to continuously go back to age because teams talk about age, and teams and fans talk about, oh, it's a young player, young up and coming player. If you're 22, just because you're a rookie or new in a league doesn't mean you're young. It doesn't mean that you're up and coming. There are players who are younger than you, who are better than you. When are you going to be able to overcome that gap, that talent gap? Most likely never. And that's not me trying to like destroy this guy's career. It's just there are players in the LCS who are much better than Pride Stalker and younger than Pride Stalker, which is a problem if you're Golden Guardians and trying to create a team that has a window of opportunity to win sometime in the future. Next up is Xerxes. Xerxes is someone who we've been watching for probably 4 or 5 years, was at their peak a very good player on Unicorns of Love, and was okay on like Origin and teams like that, but was never really at the same level as Unicorns of Love. I think that Unicorns of Love at their peak were like very unlucky to not perform better and have more like championships and stuff like that, because the way that they approached the game was very intelligent, very fun to watch, and was different. And it's nice when that kind of works, but unfortunately it doesn't really work out enough, and people get afraid to make like, you know, interesting decisions in draft and stuff like that. It's changing a little bit, but really not fast enough in my opinion. I'm really hopeful that at some point in the future we'll see a much more diverse like League of Legends, a much more diverse strategy pool for teams to kind of employ. Next up is Jose Deodo from FlyQuest. Jose Deodo is so lucky that they went to Worlds during COVID, because everybody was watching, and everybody was like, oh, Jose Deodo is so good from this Latin American team. And then he parlayed that into a professional contract in the LCS. Jose Deodo at this point is very overrated, in my opinion. He's 21, so he's a little younger than some of the other junglers in this region, but there are at least 2 junglers that are contracts age or younger that are just straight up better than him. And the fact that Jose Deodo is only, I mean, that's just the truth. And then the fact that Jose Deodo is the same age as a player like Blabber. Blabber will be better than Jose Deodo for the entire length that they're both in the LCS. Just keep that in mind. Like, when people talk about players getting better and better, there's a limit to most players' ability. And I think that Jose Deodo was at their peak in that Hecarim meta. I think that Jose Deodo is also a very good Lee Sin player, but that meta was like not the time to identify jungle talent, and I think a lot of teams fell into that trap. It's just the game was built for junglers at that point, so of course he was going to look like a superstar. But I think it's obvious that he's really not that. And you know, maybe time will prove me wrong, but I doubt it. And I will put my money where my mouth is and bet against him. Next up is Contracts. Contracts is kind of a feel-good story. Everybody wants Contracts to be successful. I want Contracts to be successful. I would love it if CLG like somehow was a competitive team and Jenkins and Contracts could be like competitive and finally see their talent more appreciated. Same thing with Palafox. I think Palafox is a pretty underappreciated player as well. Actually, is it Palafox that I'm thinking of? No, it's not Palafox. I'm not a big fan of Palafox. I'm a big fan of a Blaze Olive. Sorry, that was a mistake. I always get them confused. But yeah, contracts, I want them to do well. I just don't think it's likely. Santorin is obviously not as good as they used to be. Santorin's had some big issues with like health, which is somewhat concerning. I think that Santorin and Bjergsen coming back together will be a good combination. I think that Team Liquid will be a good team, and I think that Santorin will have moments where they're like able to carry the game because of like draft differences or just like talent gapping the other team. Because if going into a game, I know that Santorin can play multiple styles, isn't going to be a big problem in the draft for their team, and does have the ability to pull out like a carry performance every once in a while. But he's not the focal point of his team. He's not an elite jungler anymore, and he never really was. So that's that. Then we have Spica. Spica's 20, okay? Spica is younger than Santorin, Contracts, Jose Deodo, Xerxes, and Pride Stalker. If you think that any of those players are better than Spica, I can't help you. We will never agree on that, and we just look at League of Legends differently. If you genuinely think some of those players are better than Spica, then you can try betting, see how it goes. You'll probably lose a decent amount of money and then quit. There's not really much to say. Spica can play all of the different styles. Spica is going to really be pushed this split because of the different language barriers that are within the team. It's going to be on Spica. I've heard that it's going to be on Spica to kind of translate for the Chinese imports. I think that Tactical might understand some Chinese, and it wouldn't surprise me if Huni did as well, but I don't really know 100% how big of a problem those language issues could really be. This might be a year, if this kind of these new players don't really work out, this might be a time where people start downgrading their opinion of Spica, and if that's the case, then I will be leaving him the same, and that's the kind of spot where I would feel like I have a betting edge in the future. So Spica, definitely in the A tier. It's tough to differentiate between a lot of these junglers. I don't think that they're necessarily an S, but definitely one of the better junglers in the LCS, and can compete with all of the other junglers, as well as probably some of the world-class junglers, because stylistically, Spica has that like peanutness to him, where he can kind of choke out the enemy team, which is not easy for a lot of players. Next up, we have Inspired, and there are a lot of acquisitions that have been talked about this offseason. Inspired going to Evil Geniuses will probably be one of the most important moves of this offseason. I love Inspired. Inspired's a very, very good player. The fact that Rogue went and got Malrong instead of them, I get why you would do that. Malrong was on Damwon, and like that might be the kind of situation where they felt like they couldn't pass up the opportunity to get somebody like Malrong, but giving up a player like Inspired just is kind of insane to me. But good for him. I think that this is a great situation for him. I love Danny. I think that Danny is probably the best North American player. Well, I have hopes that Danny is going to be the best North American player ever, at least so far. And supposedly, Jojo Pyun is going to compete with him for that title. So the fact that we have Jojo Pyun and Danny, who are both 17 years old, and then Inspired, who's 19 years old, if they click and they all perform to their top level, their top range of outcomes, then they're going to be one of the best teams in North America, and they're the kind of team who can stack up experience for a couple of years and then be competitive during their 22, 23, 24 year seasons or even younger than that, they can be competitive on an international level. I think that Evil Geniuses has that kind of upside as long as this core can kind of meld together. So I'm a huge fan of this roster, and I think that Inspired being the youngest jungler in the LCS is hilarious because people will think of him as like a known quantity, and they won't even think about his age, where they're going to probably say something like, oh, Pride Stalker, young, hungry player. It's like, okay, well, Inspired's younger than them, and Inspired's just like twice the player that they are. So watch out for that, because it will happen on one of these LCS broadcasts, because those guys don't know what they're doing. Guys and girls. Got to be fair. None of them know what they're doing. And when I say stuff like that, they're good at their job, which is to talk about the game and like have opinions, even though most of their opinions are the same, and get people talking about League of Legends. They do a great job of that, but most of them don't have real opinions that would be actionable from a betting perspective, because they just kind of spew garbage a lot of the time, and they kind of have to vamp a lot of the time, where they're probably saying stuff that they don't even believe. Somebody like Azael, I respect Azael a lot. Azael will always kind of rock the boat and be like, no, that's wrong. This is why it's wrong. This is like the real situation. And I don't always agree with Azael, but I agree with Azael probably more than any of the other casters from North America. Moving on, River. So River is a good player. I don't know if River is a great player. River has continuously switched regions looking for like a home to like be competitive long term. When we saw them this year, it was like Hanabi, River, Maple. And River played really well. I think that River proved at Worlds that they can compete on an international level. They won't necessarily be the best player in their role, but they will be one of the best in their role. And by the way, I'm making Inspired S tier. Spica is borderline S tier. I don't think I'd put River S tier yet. But they all like that. This A tier, I'm gonna leave everybody besides Inspired in the A tier. I do think Inspired is just better than them. But I think that Spica, Blabber, and River definitely have the chance to be as good as Inspired, and probably Closer too. But I think Closer's a little overrated right now, but still a good player. So with River, I don't have any concerns with River. I think that they're instantly better than Santorin and are one of the 5 best junglers in the LCS. It's possible that they will look bad because of Dignitas not being a good team or not having enough assets around him to allow him to shine. But I think that River on his own, if you took out Inspired and put in River, I think that they'd still be a very good team. It would limit their upside a little bit, but they'd still be very good. If you put River on Team Liquid, CLG, FlyQuest Immortals, or Golden Guardians, they would instantly become a better team, in my opinion. Next up, we have Blabber. Last year was a down year for Blabber. Actually, the last 2 years have kind of been down years for Blabber because the metas just really haven't suited Blabber. But you don't lose that level of talent that Blabber has. And as time goes on, I think that we'll see more and more positives from Blabber, unless this Cloud9 roster completely falls apart, which is very unlikely. But it's possible. It's possible that this Cloud9 roster fails. I don't think it will fail, and I'm willing to bet on Cloud9 from day one. But it is in the back of my mind. I hope it goes well. I want LS Summit, Blabber, Fudge to be successful, and I love the idea that they got Berserker and Winsome. I think that was a really smart kind of acquisition, assuming that they end up playing well. But there's no reason to think that they won't be at least league average in the LCS. So with that being said, Blabber is another player I think has the S tier upside. But for now, we'll just leave him in A tier. And then last but not least, we have Closer. And Closer is a good player. Closer can play the carry style meta pretty well. It'll be interesting to see what happens if we go into more of a tank jungle meta. I think that we'll miss will miss the jungle meta if that happens, because it's a little bit more interesting when you have these gigantic jungle gaps happening, like relatively frequently. But good player overall. So yeah, I have Inspired as the only S tier player with some potential competition. Then I have Closer, Blabber, River, and Spica, who are all good players in my mind, and can play on most Western teams without it being a big downgrade. And then we have Santorin on their own, because I think that Santorin's experience outweighs the potential upside of players like Contracts, Jose Dioto, Xerxes, and Pride Stalker. Let's go to the mid lane. So first up, we have Kaiduo. I don't know anything about this player, so I'm putting them in C tier. That's just the truth. Ablaze Olive. I think that Ablaze Olive is probably one of the most unlucky players in LCS, because they have a very diverse champion pool, and they have shown the ability to completely carry games against good teams in the LCS. But when they were drafted by TSM, Bjergsen was the starter at the LCS level, and Ablaze Olive was never going to overtake Bjergsen. But I think that Ablaze Olive probably had a few years there where he could have been a very good LCS player, if a team gave him the opportunity, and maybe he would have turned into something. But I think a lot of that is kind of just lost at this point. I like Ablaze Olive. I enjoy watching them play the game, and I like how teams draft for Ablaze Olive, which shows they believe in his ability as well. But not much more to say about them. Takui, I don't think Takui's that good. I was pretty surprised that somebody would use an import slot on them from the LCS. Maybe they think that he can be one of the best mid laners in the LCS for the next couple of years. I don't really know if that's going to happen. But we are kind of in a spot where, Bjergsen, Jensen, Power of Evil are either in their they're on the back line of their career, basically. It's possible that a player like Takui, if he ends up being very good, could go to one of the top teams, and then Bjergsen or Jensen would just get recycled into one of the other rosters. It's possible that would happen. It's just I haven't seen enough out of a player like Takui to think that FlyQuest is going to be competitive, and for that reason, there's no really advantage to placing them higher. But this is a spot where there is upward mobility to the ranking. So like Takui, Kaiduo, Jojo Pyun, Blue, these players have upward mobility in my mind. Just to keep that in mind. Jojo Pyun, I've never seen Jojo Pyun play a League of Legends game. I think that they have the potential, because a lot of players have talked about it already. Evil Geniuses does a good job of scouting talent. Tim Sevenhoysen, I think that's how you say his name, Oracle's Elixir. He watches a lot of amateur, and I think that he likes Jojo Pyun as well. So at some point, you kind of just have to respect the people who are actually putting in the time and effort to watch those kinds of games. I don't have enough time in the day to do that sort of stuff, which isn't a knock on them. Like, if I could, I would. I really would. Like, if I could make money doing it, I would do it. Or make more money. I make money doing this, but not as much as guys like that do. Next up is Blue. I don't know anything about Blue, really. I've seen him play in multiple leagues. I'm not impressed. It's another player that I don't know why you would use an import slot on them. I'm not sure how old they are. I don't know. No, I wouldn't be surprised if Blue was a league average player. I wouldn't be surprised if they were gone after one split. Both of those outcomes seem fine to me. Palafox. I don't like Palafox. Not a very influential player in my mind. Not somebody who makes me feel good about betting on a team. Generally, it makes me feel bad about betting on a team. I instantly would rather have Kaiduo, Ablaze Olive, Takui, Jojo Pyun. I'd rather have all of those players than Palafox. Meaning I would want to bet on that other team if I thought it was going to be like a mid-centric game. So there's that. Then we have Bjergsen. I feel like Bjergsen's name recognition is going to get them put at the top of a lot of these kind of tier lists. I don't think that Bjergsen is as good as Abadage right now. And I'm putting Fudge higher because I believe in the upside of Fudge. I could easily see it being Bjergsen better than Fudge. That's fine. It's just for my purposes, the reason why I make these kinds of tier lists is because when I start looking at matchups one-on-one, when Cloud9 plays Team Liquid, I will most likely be betting on Cloud9 because I want to bet into the uncertainty of Cloud9 in the beginning of the year. Because everybody's going to say Team Liquid is the known quantity and be confident that this is going to work out. Like, I love Team Liquid. I love the players on Team Liquid. But when you're getting two very good teams against one another, in my mind, you kind of have to pick the underdog if there's additional value there. And I would expect Cloud9 to be the underdog in that matchup. Next up, we have Power of Evil. So now Power of Evil is on Immortals. Power of Evil is one of my favorite players in the LCS. But they're not going to look good on on Immortals probably. Like a good LeBlanc player, a good Orianna player, can be very impactful. But at this point in their career, I don't see them showing us anything that we haven't already seen. When they were on Misfits, like they proved that they could be competitive on the international level, and that is one of the reasons why I still respect them very much. And for that reason, I think they're just as good as Bjergsen. Some people might say, oh, well, when Bjergsen left, Power of Evil came in and they were worse. It's like, yes, the team altogether was worse. I don't think that Power of Evil was the reason for that. Then next up we have Fudge. I know that Fudge is going into their first split as a mid laner. That kind of stuff doesn't really bother me. I think that when you're at a certain talent level, you can role swap, and it's not really going to do much because there's so much time to learn the role, learn the champions. So many champions can be used in multiple roles. It really accelerates the learning. It accelerates the learning process for players who put in the time. Because like you see, Bwipo transition, instantly good. Xiaohu transition, instantly good. And we're not saying that Fudge needs to go out and be like an LCS or a Korean, an LCK or an LPL caliber mid laner in the beginning of this year. They just need to be as good or better than everybody else in LCS. And I think from day one, unless Kaiduo and Jojo Pyun are like crazy good, Fudge will be a top 5 mid laner for sure. If that fails, if it fails, it's going to fail spectacularly. But I don't think it's going to fail to that level. Worst case scenario, you put him on like control mage duty and let somebody else try to win the game. And then last but not least, we have Abadaga. Abadaga right now is probably the best mid laner in the LCS in terms of like who can you trust. You can trust Abadaga for the most part. I don't think that the mid lane talent in the LCS is good right now, unless Kaiduo or Jojo Pyun really blow the top off. Like, could Fudge, Abadaga, Jojo Pyun, Kaiduo, could one or two of them turn into like elite international players? Maybe. I just think it's very unlikely. But we'll see. That's why they play the games. Let's go to ADC. So, honestly, if you've watched my videos for any amount of time, you'll know that Wild Turtle is probably my least favorite player in the LCS. I think that Wild Turtle is horrible. I really do. I think Wild Turtle is a good person, good, easy to root for, in that way. But if you're betting your hard-earned money on an LCS team, you do not want Wild Turtle on them, because Wild Turtle has some of the most mind-numbing mistakes. He's just very mistake-prone and makes not small mistakes that are annoying to see. He makes game-losing mistakes that will turn your winning bet into a losing bet. And I will never forgive him for that. So, worst AD carry in the league. I don't need to see Berserker or Luger to know that Wild Turtle is the worst in the league. Next up, we have Lost. Lost had a really tough year last year, and was really almost Wild Turtle level of like losing lane and losing the game. Some of that probably is not entirely their fault. Like maybe some of that should be placed onto Sword Art, but Sword Art took an unknown AD carry in Huanfeng and went to the World Finals. So it's probably not Sword Art's fault that Lost had a bad year. Not much more to say about that. Johnson, we've seen Johnson and Afromu lane together before. I was hopeful that Johnson would be better than they are, but it seems like Johnson is probably just going to be a league average at best for their career, which is fine. You can make a decent amount of money being average, but he's not going to be the difference maker for like an entire split. Then we have Neo. Neo has had some really good carry performances. I think that Neo is most likely someone who you're probably going to enjoy watching, especially for DraftKings reasons. Like he's the kind of player who will get you potentially gigantic kill scores and a lot of points on DraftKings. But you know, not somebody that I'm. It's not somebody that I would build a team around. Luger is interesting. I'm pretty sure that Luger played in academy and was like very good, right? Yeah, so everybody was talking about Luger last year, and there are a lot of people who are hopeful that they'll be a very good LCS player. And that's why it's kind of interesting a team like CLG has this type of roster, because they are a relatively young roster. They're not young enough in their other roles to like have them become the transcendental talent of the team. But Luger is borderline because you have a lot of mediocre AD carries who are young. So like if Luger ends up being better than Neo, Johnson, Lost, Wild Turtle, and can compete with Tactical, Hansama, Danny, and FBI, then you'll have, 3 or 4, maybe 5 years of Luger being able to go even with the best players in the league, which would be very beneficial for CLG. And then if Luger ends up being the best out of all those players, then you don't need Jenkins to be the best top laner. You don't need Contracts to be the best jungler. And then like you're a good mid laner away from being competitive. So that's really the best case scenario for a team like CLG. It seems very unlikely. It seems very unlikely for Luger to be good enough to kind of eliminate the talent differential in the other positions, but it's possible. I wouldn't bet on it. TSM. Or no, not TSM. Cloud9. So Cloud9 got Berserker. I think that if I was going to bet on where they end up, I would bet they're a top 5 AD carry, because you don't get to the level that they did in Korea without having immense talent. Those places, the other regions are generally much better than the LCS at identifying talent. So if they were already in like a farm system for one of these Korean teams, they're probably better than everybody in the LCS. It's a real possibility that they are a top 2 AD carry day one. It's possible. And that's another thing that I would bet on, because if the betting market released that kind of bet, they would probably have Berserker at the wrong odds. So that'd be a plus EV bet. Next up, we have Tactical. I'm surprised Tactical got flamed as much as they did last year. I think that Tactical is, at their peak, they are willing to put the game on their shoulders and try to win the game. You don't get that enough from AD carries. So I have a lot of respect for Tactical for doing that. It's like the same thing as Jackie Love. I don't think that Tactical is as good as Jackie Love, but they're willing to make that like insane mistake, because if it went right, then their team would potentially win the game. Like those are the kinds of plays that you need to be able to see, and even though they're going to fail sometime on stage, it's better than not trying them at all. Then we have Hansama. I love Hansama, another player from that Misfits team that made a run at Worlds. Hansama is one of my favorite AD carries in the West. I think that Hansama is another player who, if the team drafts correctly, you're going to get Hansama in an advantageous matchup most of the time because his mechanical ability is very high. I was listening to the dive, and they were talking about how Hansama isn't really like that hard carry player. It's because he doesn't always need to be. His teams don't draft around him that way because their play styles were more about getting those early game advantages and then snowballing. So when Hansama goes off, it's because his team has snowballed in the early game. And like he's gotten some kills, but at the same time, he knows how to kind of back off and not be the player that loses his team the game, which is another good skill for an AD carry to have. I think that Hansama is instantly one of the best AD carries in the LCS. He's probably better than FBI. He's probably better than Danny. But, you know, that's fine. Next up, we have Danny. Danny is my favorite. Danny's my favorite player in the world right now. I am so hopeful that Danny is going to be like the player that can bring North America some kind of success on the international stage. Danny is a playmaker. Danny will do whatever it takes to win, and is willing to look stupid sometimes to do that. Some of the plays that they made last split like made me literally laugh out loud from how amazing they were. Like, it is against LCS competition, which makes me, take it with a grain of salt, but Danny's just incredible. Anybody who's watched Danny play and seen those highlights knows how good this player is, and unless something uncontrollable happens to Danny, they will be one of the best AD carries in North America for the next 5 years. For sure. I think that it's without a doubt that's going to happen. And I hope that's the case. I really do, because it could be very important for North America, for North American League of Legends, that happens. And then last but not least, we have FBI. Personally, I think FBI is a little overrated because of how positive people have talked about FBI in the past. People think that they're like an international, they're good enough on the international level to be competitive with like LPL and LCK teams where FBI can be the winning difference, but it's just not true. FBI is good, but FBI is not that good. I think that Danny's ceiling is higher than FBI. I think that FBI could be on a team that wins LCS and is competitive at Worlds, but they're not going to be competitive at Worlds because FBI is so much better than all the AD carries. I know it's a very specific, it's an important distinction to make. Maybe it's lost in translation and I'm not accurately describing like my thought about that, but that's really what it comes down to for me. But definitely in the A tier. So FBI, Danny, Hansama are the three best AD carries. I think that Danny's probably the best AD carry today, but I think that the experience and the history that we have from FBI and Hansama means that they should at least be on the same level. At some point during this split, Danny will probably be in S tier for me, but not yet. I mean, I would like to. I just don't think I'm being honest if I put them in the S tier yet. We need to see it a little bit more. But in terms of my hope ranking, he is S tier internationally. But that's for a year from now probably. And then we have support. So for support, it's really difficult to differentiate supports from team performances. And some of these players I've never even seen play. So like Shenyi, I have no idea. And that's why I'm putting them in C. Destiny, it's funny how a player like Destiny is thought of as a very good player when they were on Origin, and then they come to the LCS, and it's like, or he's not really that good. Like, I just don't get how that happens with League of Legends fans. I think that he's probably in the C tier. He's not as good as Vulcan or Core JJ, but, most players aren't. So I don't think that Destiny's going to be the best support in the LCS ever. That's basically that. Ale, 27. Long in the tooth, as they say. Doesn't really make a lot of sense for me. I don't understand why they would build a team this way. Just was never really that good. I understand why they would be on a team. Like, maybe they're one of the 10 best options for an LCS team, but if there were no import restrictions, Ale wouldn't even come close to an LCS roster. So there's that. Afromu, I love Afromu. I think that Afromu is a borderline B tier support because Afromu is willing to make the aggressive plays that will turn a game around. That results in them having gigantic death total sometimes, but in reality, that doesn't really matter. It's like you have to try to give your team the best chance to win every individual matchup. And I think that Afromu does genuinely try to do that, which is more than I can say for a lot of other professional supports. Biofrost was always pretty good. Not really a difference maker a lot of the time, which is one of the reasons why TSM let them go. So I think league average is the most fair. And there is a gap between Vulcan, Core JJ, and everybody else. So you kind of have to leave it this way, in my opinion. Poom, I haven't seen enough from Poom to think that they're anything more than a C tier support. Again, it's really difficult to make that distinction in that role because a support's success is generally directly correlated to a team's success. Or like their talent, the film that we see from them is so distorted because of how the games go. Like you could be a top laner in a losing game and still do something impressive. It's much more difficult for a support to do that. Winsome, no idea, but I'm hopeful that it turns out okay. I think that Tim Sevenhoisen said that he thinks that Isles is better than Winsome. I don't know. I think the fact that they speak Korean is going to be very beneficial for their team regardless because of that synergy between Berserker and Winsome. Hopefully that does come to fruition and does help them. But I don't know. It's tough to say. I don't know enough about Winsome to put them anything higher than C tier. Huhi, I think that the Huhi story is kind of awesome, and like what they were able to accomplish by role swapping and the amount of dedication that takes is kind of insane. It's not extremely shocking because it's like the guy's been playing League of Legends forever, has played a lot of support in solo queue probably even before the transition. But you know, they're a good player. They are a playmaker at points. I'm kind of on the fence about putting them in B tier, but I think that it's fair considering the rest of the supports in the LCS are kind of bad, in my mind, or at least not as good as Huhi. Then we have Core JJ, literal world champion. Nothing really to say about that. And then we have Vulcan, who is one of the best supports in the LCS. I think that's undeniable. Don't really have anything else to say about that. So with that being said, I want to talk about the different teams. I haven't put this into a tier list yet, but I'm going to do that now. So let's see. The teams who I think are not good. So let's do Dig. Let's do Dig first. Fake God, River, Blue, Neo, Biofrost. Most likely C tier. Hundred Thieves is most likely A tier, and I'll do more of a breakdown for these teams. Let's just do this. A tier, A tier, A tier, A tier, A tier. Immortals. No. They're gonna be competitive though. Maybe not. CLG. I'm hopeful for CLG. I want them to do better, but I'm not sure that's likely. FlyQuest, no. Dignitas. Probably not. So I think that these teams, we can be pretty confident, are not going to compete for the top 5. And even if they do get a top 5 spot going into playoffs, I'm going to bet against them. I can say that with almost absolute certainty at this point. TSM, without seeing Kaiduo and Shen Yi, it's really tough to put TSM higher than 5, in my opinion. So we'll see how that goes. Cloud9. Cloud9 is a team that I'm going to be betting on a lot. I'll put them at 3, 1, 2, 4. So for my top 5, I want to be very clear. I think that these teams are all relatively close. The reason I've ranked them this way is because this is probably the order that I think I have an edge. I think that relative to other people who are betting and playing DraftKings and all that kind of stuff, I'm willing to bet. I think that I'm willing to bet on EG more than anybody else, or at least equal to anybody else who is like a very high supporter of EG. I want to bet as much money as possible. Well, I want to bet a lot of money on EG before everybody else starts saying that they're very good. C9, there's a lot of uncertainty around them. So again, I want to be betting on them heavily because if it's like C9 against 100 Thieves, C9 against Team Liquid, I want to be on the underdog, and I think that C9 will be the underdog going into those matchups according to the sports books. 100 Thieves, I think it's tough to kind of go against 100 Thieves at this point because their team is very solid. They have a good roster. Against Team Liquid specifically, I think that the only problem with Team Liquid is what's their identity going to be like in these games. But I could easily see myself picking Team Liquid against 100 Thieves. That matchup specifically is one that will depend on what the odds are listed as. I'll probably bet Team Liquid over 100 Thieves like every time. I am a little concerned about Team Liquid. Team Liquid's a team that I might be overrating, and 100 Thieves might be a team I'm underrating. And then TSM, I like the players on TSM. I want TSM to be successful, but I'm not willing to pick them against 100 Thieves because I've been burned by that before. I'm not willing to pick them against Team Liquid yet because I think that Team Liquid's talent is just better unless Kaiduo ends up being very good. So that's basically it. I know it's a long video. Thanks for sticking around if you watch the whole thing. I like making these longer style videos because it helps people understand where I'm coming from. Helps them see what I think about individual players and the teams, and it gives us a good foundation for the rest of the year. Things will change. My opinion will change at points. But that's basically it. So, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.